Welcome to the Steve Setka Show, your uncensored champion. I'm your host, Steve Setka, and I'm diving deep into the things that matter most to me: sport, freight, and faith. On this show, we're not afraid to go beyond the surface. We get real, share bold opinions, and hit you where it may be uncomfortable. These are the topics I'm passionate about, and I bet they'll spark something in you too. So buckle up for quick, high-impact episodes that'll shake you up. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Steve Setka Show, even more fearless than ever. I'm your host, Steve Setka, and we got a really good guest on today. But before we get into the guest on the show, we're going to do the same thing we do every week. It's a fresh episode. It's a fresh verse, and we're getting right into it right away. 1 Peter 3:15 from the New International Version states, "But in your heart, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." With that being said, Trey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I love that verse. That's one of my favorite verses. I'm excited for us to actually talk about that today and my journey, my story of really being all in starting back when I was 24 and how that verse was a big part of it. So I'm excited about that today.
That's incredible, man. That's awesome. You took the first question right out of my mouth. I mean, what hits home? Like, how does that sit? Like when you hear that, do you just get the jitters? Like, what does that make you feel?
Well, my story is I grew up in a home where we went to church quite a bit when I was really young. And then my parents divorced when I was 7. And anybody who knows divorce, a lot of times what happens is people stop going to church because it's embarrassing. And a lot of times people at church don't know how to handle somebody who goes through a divorce. There wasn't anything like divorce care back in the day. And so our family really went different directions. My mom moved to a different suburb near town, went to a different church, and was very involved and kept us involved, which was great. But my dad, I think he was so embarrassed, he just didn't want to go. And he never really discouraged me from going. When your parents aren't going to church, eventually, a lot of times you fall out of the habit. And that's what happened to me, was I stopped going to church. I didn't really grow up in a youth group or anything like that. And so when I was in college, I started to really examine my faith, examine faith in general, examine scriptures a little bit more, and had some interest from students that I was with in college. And then I spent a year after college with my sister out in Oregon. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with life, and she offered for me to come out there for a year and work and figure things out. And it was through that time that I learned the value of being part of a church, of serving in a church, of tithing to church, and just all these different kind of little skills that I learned along the way. And it was very much a pivotal moment in my life that one year with my sister. Well, then I moved back from Oregon to Kansas City, which is where I grew up. And I was at a place in life where I was at a real fork in the road, spiritually speaking. I thought in my mind, if Jesus is who the Bible says he is, if he's the Son of God, if he rose from the dead, then I'm all in and I'm going to give everything. But if he's not, I'm done playing the game. And I think that's actually a very rational position. If Jesus isn't the Son of God, if he didn't raise from the dead after dying on the cross, then what are we doing? Why are we going to church? Why are we even doing it? As the Bible says, let us eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. So that was my position, but I was very much where I wanted to know, I wanted to learn, I wanted to understand. And I happened to have a mentor in my life who was my mom's pastor. His name was Keith Gibson. He is in Kansas City there. He's still pastor of that church today, just celebrating their 35th anniversary as a church. Pretty cool. But he was about 9 to 10 years older than me. And I remember when I moved back to Kansas City, I just wanted to know, I wanted to learn, I wanted to study, and I needed help. And so I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, I know that you seem to be very intelligent about what you believe and why you believe it. Can you help me understand that and just help me evaluate?" And this guy really took me under his wing. He came to my place of employment and we went and had lunch once a week, every week for like 2.5, 3 years. And sometimes we would talk about, this apologetics, the study of being able to defend your faith. Sometimes we just talk about life. Sometimes we talk about sports, whatever. But he spent, 3 years, a good 3 years really investing in me. And one of the verses that was important is what you read in 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give a defense for the reason for your hope in Christ. Like, why do you believe this? Why do you believe this? Is it just because your parents said to believe it? It's just because you have blind faith, or it's wish, it feels good. Did somebody put a gun to their head? Like, why do you believe this? Is there proof behind this? Is there evidence? Is there reason behind it? And so that really got me in the mind frame that I wanted to know, and I wanted to be able to communicate and defend what I believe if it's real. And if it's not real, I just wasn't going to waste my time anymore. So that's the backstory behind that and where that verse really mattered was I just took it to heart to say, "Hey, if this is real, I'm going to be able to explain why I believe it.
Mhm.
And if it's not, I'm going to move on."
That's incredible. I love that answer. I took down a couple notes, and I feel the exact same way. I mean, what are we doing here if it isn't true? And if it is true, I mean, it's the greatest story that mankind has ever known.
Hmm.
And that's what I believe. And I think that's what you believe as well, too. And I'm very excited to
100%.
talk about this. Absolutely. And it reminds me of a couple things for sure. I mean, you had a mentor, right? Who you talked to for 3 years every week and you went for lunch. I do that as well. I have a couple. And specifically, there's one man that I can pinpoint. His name's Larry Dick, and he owns a big trucking company up here in Canada. He hauls a bulk liquid, and he's incredible with his faith. And I did the same. I'd go to lunch with him, and I would go to his house, and he would have me over, and he'd have a group of young men and young women over, and just talking about it and talking about the same thing. And it played a big impact in my role as a provider, and as my role as a man in my life as well too. And really, what you're talking about is the essence of manhood. I believe in the essence of being able to present something well. So I went to Toastmasters for a long period of time, about 6 years when I started my business, because of the fact that I'm like, look, I believe in certain types of things, but I need to learn how to present them in an effective manner that I can, for example, defend my faith. I can defend my position. I can explain my opinion and be persuasive in that example. And I mean, we got no better example of what we're going through right now. And Trey, I gotta touch the elephant in the room or address the elephant in the room. I want to ask you about Charlie Kirk because this has been absolutely occupying my mind almost in an unhealthy manner. I don't think it's unhealthy. I think it's actually quite healthy. And he was almost the perfect pillar for this exact concept. When we talk about these types of things that happened last week, how do you think this relates to what we're talking about today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that there's a couple of kind of ground rules or kind of main points that need to be said before really addressing that. I think the first one is very simply that, Charlie Kirk wasn't perfect. None of us believe that. He didn't get everything right, but he was very articulate. He was very well studied, and he knew what he believed, and he was able to articulate that and defend that, which is impressive, number one. Number two is I know that there are a lot of sensitivities on both sides of this issue. And so speaking my opinion does not in any way mean to attack anybody else in that regard, but it's just simply to say there's certain things I believe about this that I think should be universal. But I've also realized something about this that's really fascinating, and that is social media has put people in two different camps and reinforced those two camps in a way that I didn't really recognize until late last week when I spoke with some friends who had been seeing things differently than me. And I almost blew me away. Like I struggled at first to understand how they could see it their way. They struggled to see how I could see it my way. And I realized the power of social media to not only send us different messages, but to reinforce those messages and really create alternate universes of how we're seeing things, which is wild. It's so crazy that we take the same clip, and depending on how you clip it or how you talk about it or whatever, you might send a different message. So there's some interesting things around this that are I think fascinating in some ways that I definitely want to get out ahead of time and just acknowledge those things before I share my opinions on these.
Yeah,
In,
I love
in
that.
regard
Great framing.
well, in regards to regards to what Charlie Kirk was doing, a couple things. I think is disingenuous for anybody to think that our politics, what we believe about government, is not derived from what we believe in life. And politics and government policies is about trying to implement laws based on what we believe is right. And everybody has an opinion. Everybody believes that they are right, and it's this kind of like this concept of sharing these ideas and trying to find out which idea is the best, and then implementing that idea. But at the core of it, all of our political beliefs are a part of what we believe about life in general. And so there's this. I've been talking to a lot of people about this. There's this idea that politics and religion shouldn't merge. That religion or what you believe shouldn't impact politics, and vice versa. I just don't think that's realistic. When the framers wrote the Constitution, they were concerned about government interfering with religion. They were not concerned about religion interfering with government because they believe that if you're going to create a law, it's based on some moral tenet. We have a law that thou shalt not kill or do not murder, however you want to say it, that it's a felony to murder somebody, an innocent being. And where does that come from? And some would say, well, that just comes from human nature. Others would say, no, that comes from the Ten Commandments. That comes from the Bible. But all of it comes from this belief that something is right or wrong. And so I think it's really interesting to think about it from those perspectives when we think about Charlie Kirk. He espoused political views. He also unashamedly espoused his views about God, about Jesus, about what he believes, about being a follower of God. And either way, in both of those cases, especially in terms of his faith, he was very bold, very courageous to share what he believed was the truth. And I think I think what's, a lot of people have said, I've seen this on social media, a lot of people have said, I didn't know the guy, but I feel like I lost a friend. I feel like I lost a brother. And I think as I evaluated my feelings and what happened, the most honest way I can say it is I feel like Charlie was doing what we're all called to do, but we're not willing to do it. Like we're kind of playing it safe. We don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to lose business. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. We don't want anybody to yell at us. I'm a big people pleaser. I know that. I want people to like me. And in doing so, I have not been bold about what I believe and letting the chips fall where they may. And that's something I think that this has shown, is that here's a man who is willing to put it all on the line, including his life, as it turns out, to speak what he believes. And there's something incredibly noble about that. So those are my initial thoughts when I think about the situation with Charlie Kirk. I'm hesitant to like lionize the guy or to put him on the same pedestal as obviously Jesus, but I would definitely put him on the same pedestal as, for example, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, JFK, and Robert Kennedy, and other people who have unashamedly stood for what they believe, and they were killed for it. They were not, Charlie wasn't brandishing a gun. He wasn't threatening anybody else. He wasn't, committing harm to anybody else. Although some on the other side would say, well, his words were harmful, but unfortunately, I don't agree with that. He wasn't trying to kill anybody or hurt anybody, not in a physical sense, not like what happened to him, but that's what happened. And so some people say he's a martyr. Other people say, no, he's not a martyr material, whatever. I think anybody who is willing to talk and share their ideas and share them firmly, and who is killed for those ideas, whether it be political or religious, is a martyr. Somebody who dies for what they believe innocently. So I put him in that category, but I know it's a pretty delicate topic all around. But I tend to see him as somebody that I wish I had the courage that he had. And that's something I'm trying to think about, ask myself why, and then make changes accordingly.
Well, it's an incredible story, and I love your perspective and I love your take, because I don't want to get too much in the weeds of it, right? Like a left, right, politics, religion, different types of things. What I want to focus on with Charlie Kirk in my own life is the principles of what he stood for. And I think I'm very cautious when I say this, but I think that there's some absolutes when it comes to who he was as an individual. I don't necessarily love to speak in absolutes, right? You don't want to paint everybody in the same brush or paint a certain situation with one color per se. But here's what I wrote down. Okay. According to the Constitution and the law of the United States, Charlie Kirk was not a criminal. Okay. So I think we can all agree. Some people might not agree. Think he might have been a criminal. He should have been a criminal. I mean that, but he's not, according to the definition of the law. I am biased when it comes to these situations, but the principles I feel are whole. What color did Charlie Kirk bleed?
Red.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's another thing that's not disputed. Do we all agree in the world that he wasn't perfect? Probably.
Yes.
Did he put himself out there in a situation, and was he kind? Was he compassionate? And was he open for discussion and debate? And did he respect everybody equally? Yes. Right. So that's what I want to focus on per se in my life when it comes to this situation, is to live by those principles. And I found myself saying that a lot these days. In true Charlie fashion, or here's what he might have said or what he might have thought, because regardless of what if you think about him in terms of opinions, if you believe him or if you don't, if you agree with him or if you don't, if you love him or you hate him, I, for one, am unabashedly unafraid and unapologetic about saying that I was a big fan. And I modeled, parts of my life and parts of this show on that, and being bold and uncensored. And yes, I get some heat for that, of course, but he had a big impact. And that's the thing that makes me very sad. And I can't stop necessarily thinking about it. So one thing that does bother me is exactly what you framed, is when we get too much into the weeds about what he did say or what he didn't say, or, was he this or was he that? Or let's get into the details of this or that. I just want to focus necessarily on the principles. And I think that's what we should be doing as a society and a civilization, good or bad, love him or hate him aside. He had an impact on the world. So it's very interesting to talk about that. And I love having the conversation because it somewhat consumed me. And it sometimes feels like it's a little bit too much for what I can handle. But in true Charlie fashion, he said, look, you don't have to handle everything. Give your problems to the Lord. One of my favorite songs right now, it's a worship song, is called God Problems, and it speaks exactly on that concept, which is incredible. And I just got to say this, Matt, there has not been a person in my lifetime since 1991, when I was born, that has had this much of an impact on my life when they died that I did not know personally. Do you feel the same
Yeah.
way? Similar?
I do tend to feel the same way. The other one in my life that was probably the most shocking for me was Kobe Bryant in that regard. I played basketball in college. I loved playing basketball. I love the sport. Kobe was coming onto the scene we graduated in the same year. So we're the same age. So as he graduates high school and goes in the NBA, I graduate high school and go to college. I did get to play in college, which was cool, but I got to watch this guy journey into the NBA, become an all-star, and really start to take that mantle from Michael Jordan of best player in the league. And he always had really fascinating things to say about mindset, obviously the Mamba mentality and things that he did. And I remember when he passed away, feeling that probably a level of emptiness that I couldn't even really comprehend and understand because I never met the guy. Like I don't know Kobe Bryant. Never watched him play, and I've never seen the guy live. Never watched him play in person. Never went to a game. But it was just this feeling of a void or an absence of a voice. I think that's the biggest thing. Is it's the absence of a voice that clearly was shaping cultural issues in his regard, mindset around athletes and competition. With Charlie, clearly around politics and spirituality. And so, yeah, I think that probably has been kind of the biggest impact on somebody I don't know who passed away. But Kobe was pretty wild too in that regard. And I guess the great thing about social media is that since Kobe passed away, I feel like I see more of him now than I did before he passed away. More of his interviews, more of his thoughts, and he'll never grow old at this point. Like he'll never have gray hair or wrinkles on his face when we watch clips of him. He'll always be forever. Uh, 40, 45, I think is what he was when he passed away, or 46, something like that. So, like that's pretty wild to kind of think about that I've seen more Kobe clips now than before he passed away. And I imagine it'll be the same with Charlie Kirk, but there's definitely a void in terms of just his impact on the culture and on me personally.
I'm really glad you brought that up. And this is hilarious. I tell people this all the time, Trey. I'm going to tell you this. I do not believe in coincidences. Okay. There are no coincidences out there. They're all Godcidences, if you want to call it that. He has intentional purpose for life, for people getting in touch at the exact time when they need it. I think I said this to you last week, and we got in touch exactly when we needed it. I have a very good friend. His name's Tyler, and he's a huge Kobe Bryant fan. And I talked with him at length. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't necessarily think of that one per se when I mentioned that comment, but I would agree. I would tend to agree. And the essence of this show is freight, faith, and sport. So we're hitting on all the pieces that I like to talk about when we talk about these two individuals, which is beautiful and impactful. I want to get your take on some silver linings here, because I feel like there are some silver linings. It's a terrible tragedy. It's horrible. I think about it all the time. It's devastating, but there are things that are going to come from this. And there are things that came from Kobe's death that we did not know were going to come, that were absolutely beautiful and incredible. What sort of silver linings come to mind going forward with this tragic?
I think it will definitely encourage people to boldly speak about their faith in ways that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. They often say that the blood of the martyrs is the fuel of a revival. And I think that you're going to see that. I think you're going to see people that are going to reevaluate what they're doing with their life. And I think that's a great thing to have that situation occur. I think it's also bringing attention to where people are, not only either publicly or within conversations, but also internally for themselves. In some ways kind of, taking sides. And this is an interesting point, because do we want to turn down the rhetoric? I think in some ways the answer is yes, because clearly you don't want these types of things to happen. But at the same time, we don't want to turn down the rhetoric to the point that we're not being faithful to speak about Christ and about Jesus and telling people about that. And that's going to be offensive. It's really interesting when you go back and you read the Gospels, the disciples didn't really know exactly who Jesus was and exactly what the mission was. In many cases, they thought it was going to be a political revolution. They thought he was going to overthrow the Roman government and give them their freedom back. They didn't really understand anything that was going on. But at one point, Jesus said in his ministry, "I have not come to bring peace, but the sword." and to divide mother against son and these different relationships, because at some point you do have to pick a side. And that's kind of the rub here is, you know, people are now seeing on for which side that they're on. And in some ways that's very biblical. And I think that's the way that it needs to be. At the other side, it's like, well, how can we do that while still toning down the rhetoric in some ways to where people aren't being killed for what they believe? And that's what we saw. And so that's kind of, I think, the challenge of it all. And maybe that's a silver lining, maybe it's not, I don't know, but I think that's a part of it in that regard. I think that more people are going to find Jesus as a result of this. And at the end of the day, that's beyond a silver lining. That's a gold lining. If we want to talk about that, because when you think about the history of the church, when you think about the history of the spread of Christianity, of Jesus, of people following Jesus, it almost always came with persecution. It almost always came with people dying as a result. All the disciples except John died directly as a result of what they believe. And it didn't slow down the spread of the gospel. It accelerated the spread of the gospel. I'm often reminded of the 5 U.S. missionaries to Ecuador in the 1950s,
Okay.
who went to Ecuador to try to reach this savage village of Indians known as the Aucas. And man, the government couldn't reach them, and nobody could really reach them. They killed anybody who got close. And there are these 5 missionaries from Wheaton College that just had this like heart to reach these people, who even said, God, I would gladly trade my life if you would save them, which is a crazy thing to say for somebody you don't even know, who,
Yeah.
if they see you, is probably going to kill you. And that's what ended up happening, is that all 5 missionaries were killed. And you look at those types of situations that look so tragic in the moment, that look like the confusing and what is happening? God, why would you allow this? Why is this happening? But then you find out the rest of the story, which we don't know the rest of this story, but you find out the rest of the story. And for the Alca Indians, for example, that entire tribe came to faith because Rachel St. and Elizabeth Elliot, a wife and a sister of 2 of the missionaries, decided to go and live with the Alcas. And they were welcomed in by the Alcas, and they spent their entire life living with them, serving them, translating the Bible into their language. All of those things that led to them all becoming God followers. And not only that, but then starting to reach out to other tribes in the area to tell them about God, probably something that no other person could do except them, to reach those people. And you see the full story. You see what God was really doing. And I think that that's going to be the case here in some ways, is eventually we'll see the full story behind why this happened, why God allowed this to happen, what this is going to mean for the kingdom, what it's going to mean for those that will find Jesus as a result of this. And that's something that I'm excited about in the rearview mirror of this. Now that we can't bring Charlie back, but what is God going to do with this? What's going to be the full story of this moment in time?
Well, he is the greatest, and I do agree with you, and that's crazy that you said that, because I saw a video on that. It was Jim Elliot was one of the men,
Jim
correct?
Elliott. Mm-hmm.
That went to
That's
Ecuador,
right.
right? That's Elizabeth Elliot story and whatnot. I did not know about the other 4, but that'll make a very good segment for YouTube later, which is awesome. So we can plug that on LinkedIn and YouTube, talk about this a little bit more. But I do agree with you, and I want to focus on the positive. Where you're right, because as much as we can't bring it back, right? As much as we make mistakes in our lives, those mistakes will always have happened, and things can't be reversed, but we can heal. And we can move forward, and we can continue to believe, and we can do a lot of different things to make the world a better place. And that's what we all want to do, necessarily. So I like where this is going, because it's positive going forward here. And the focus is now on, for example, hey, let's do the celebration of life at Arizona Cardinals Stadium on Sunday, and let's continue his legacy. Let's listen to Erica Kirk and see what she has to say, and let's galvanize her to continue that mission. And may we pray to God that we do it in an effective manner, for sure. Because you said something to me last week, Trey. You said, I forget who it was. You'll have to help me out with this. But you said we need to speak to God more about people than people about God. And I think that's where we need to go with it, because he is everlasting, he is eternal, and he is greatness. So if we're able to do this well and effectively, I think we can have that effect on people. And I think more people will come towards the Lord and the Creator, because it's the greatest story that's ever existed. So that's where I go with this. And, they say necessity is the motherhood of invention, and we are in a time of need right now, talking about faith, talking about freight, talking about the market, the economy. It's rough and it's tough. So where does that sit?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's funny you say that, necessity is the mother of all invention. That was my dad's like favorite phrase to say. So it just brought a smile to my face. My dad passed away a little over 20 years ago. And so I don't hear that phrase much unless it's coming out of my mouth. I tell that I tell that to my daughters a lot. Just as
Your daughters are going to
what
pull up this podcast episode. They're going to hear that and they're going to be like, oh, it's ridiculous.
they might do that because that is something that would be very common and normal for them to hear out of my mouth. That's for sure. But yeah, I think that there's something very clear about this. Yes, we want to debate ideas. Yes, we want to, have conversations with each other. But I think that we're in a time period, unlike any other in my lifetime, probably not in history, I wouldn't say that, but in my lifetime, where people are pretty dug into what they believe. And I really think that me arguing with somebody, especially about Jesus, is probably not going to win them over. Now, should we still talk about Jesus and share our testimony? 100% we should. But I think we have to understand in that context that our goal is not to win the argument per se. And our goal is not to, for them to become Christians as a result of our conversations per se, because we don't have control over the results. Only God can change someone's heart. And I really believe that. And so I can't hold on to the result as if it's my doing, but I can take on the responsibility of sharing what I believe, why I believe it, and having reason and an intellect behind that. Because I really believe this, that God doesn't ask us to check our minds at the door to believe Him. That He gives us a mind, He gives us logic and reason. And we're supposed to use that to understand Him better, not to check our minds at the door and have a blind faith in that regard. So there's a lot of intellect and a lot of reason that goes behind it. I believe that God is a God of order, not chaos. He's a God of design, intentionality. When you think about all the math that we have, and I'm going to use the word discovered, the math we've discovered, God has always known that. It's always been there. We just had to discover it. These universes that our telescopes are getting better and better at discovering, they were always there, but we're just discovering them. The scientific principles that we've discovered in the last 200 years, they were always there, but we had to discover them. I think about, for example, like one of my favorite things in the world, because I'm a former physics teacher, is lift, the concept of lift. It's such a cool concept of how planes fly, how birds fly, and that's always been true. That's always been true in this world. But we didn't understand it until we were able to start thinking about flight and getting something to actually fly. And now we understand that principle well enough that we can get, 200 ton planes in the air, which is crazy to think about. But that principle has always been there. We had to discover it. And so I just think there's a lot of intellect and a lot of design and a lot of reason that goes into faith in Jesus. But I don't think that I'm going to win people over through my words. I think that God's going to change their hearts, and He's going to use our words to help with that, but the results are not on me. So I say that all to wrap that up in that phrase that I shared with you. And that is, if you want someone to meet Jesus, you got to spend more time talking to God about that person than talking to that person about God. It's not that one replaces the other, but you need to spend more time talking to God about that person.
That's incredible. I love that. You said so many nuggets last week, and we talked about getting on the show, and I was like writing things down in my mind and tattooing them in there because they were so impactful. And thank you for sharing that. That's such a gift. And I feel like your ministry to the people that you speak with, and specifically your family and your community, are so blessed to have that in their life and to have you, speaking truth to them. Last thing I want to say on this topic here quickly is a little shout out to my church, Springs Church, that I go to here in Winnipeg, which is quite large and quite significant. We have a phrase that we say every week at service. It's laugh, and we spell it incorrectly because Canadians aren't always that bright. It's LAF. It's love, accept, and forgive. And that is a timeless and eternal principle. And that's something that we can all focus on moving forward for sure, because that's where I'm looking in my life right now, moving forward, looking forward, understanding and honoring the past so we can continue to get better in the future. Trey, I want to change gears a little bit here. We don't have a lot of time left, but you started your career as a teacher. You became a minister. You were preaching the gospel. You understand the Bible very well. You moved into the freight, the marketing, and the consultation realm. How did that journey occur?
How long do we have for that? Yeah, so I started as a high school physics teacher. It was my first real job. after a year of college. After college, for 1 year, I was trying to figure out life, and I ended up becoming a high school physics teacher. And to this day, my favorite job. I often tell people that if that paid anything, you guys, nobody would have met me. I would have been very happy teaching physics and coaching sports, and that would have been my life. I also wanted to have a spiritual impact, and so I got into ministry and realized that pastors oftentimes, especially youth pastors, don't actually get to spend a lot of time with students, believe it or not. They're often in the office, church office, planning for Wednesday night, planning for Sunday morning, planning for summer camp, but they're not with the kids during the day. The kids are at school all day where the teachers are. And so I got back into teaching because I realized I get to spend more time with students at school than I do as a youth pastor and an impact. And so I did that for a while. Well, during that time, my wife and I, we got married in 2005. We had our first daughter in 2008, and my wife and I both wanted to have her at home to raise our kids and to have that as a value that we had as a family and create that life for ourselves. And so we did that. We did that for two.
I want to do that too.
Yeah. So we did that for 2 years, living off of one income, one and a half, actually. I was a full-time teacher and a part-time youth pastor. So living off of, one and a half salaries, which didn't amount to much. I think in 2009 or 10, I made $50,000 for the year, which wasn't a lot. We did get through, but just barely. And we kind of looked at each other and said, this isn't going to last. We these daughters, because we had two daughters at that point, these daughters of ours are only going to get more expensive. The diapers may be expensive, but they're not nearly as expensive as dance lessons or some of the other things that are coming down the pike. And so we made the tough decision to get out of teaching, for me to get out of that in ministry, and to move into a career that could potentially provide for us so that she could stay home. And so I had a friend at church that said, hey, I think you'd be good at sales. You're competitive. You have an outgoing personality. You might enjoy it. And man, Steve, my very first thought was, no way, I'm not doing that. I kept thinking of like a used car salesman. That was my only framing of what sales was. And so I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And my friend gently taught me that every business has to have sales or they don't have a business. Now, that may seem very fundamental to people listening to this or people who are in business, but when you're a teacher and youth pastor, you don't think about revenue and where it's coming from and how it got there. You just go to work, you collect your check, and you move on. And so I'd never done anything in business. I didn't really understand like how that worked. And so I had to wrap my head around that. I did that. I went ahead and tried to get into sales. The only sales I could get into was door-to-door sales. I was one of those office supply representatives going business to business, selling paper and toner and, paper towels and toilet paper and chairs and printers, whatever I could sell. And I did that for 15 months. It was very, very hard. It was quite the shock to the system being a teacher and youth pastor to go into door-to-door sales. The rejection was through the roof. And you don't realize how much that's impacting you. When you're a teacher or youth pastor, if you just love the kids, show up at their events, ask them how they're doing, speak some truth into their life, they think you're awesome. They think you're the hero. When you go into door-to-door sales, it is the opposite, man. Like, you are not the hero. You are the evil one. You are the enemy when you walk into a business to try to sell them something on the spot. And so I learned that early on. It took me a long time to get comfortable with it and to learn how to do it. In fact, a real interesting story, if we had the time, 6 months into door-to-door, I was like, man, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And I went to my wife and I said, man, I can't. I'm so done with this. I was embarrassed. There were many weeks, Steve, where I was bringing home a check for the week of $125.
Yeah.
And that's embarrassing, especially when you're the provider. And I just thought, man, I'm failing. I can't do this. I'm done. And my wife said one of the wisest and most comforting things, most encouraging things that anybody could have said in that moment. She clearly could have said, yeah, let's move on. But she said to me in that moment, she goes, hey, listen, they're teaching you a new skill, something you've never done before. And they're actually paying you to do it. Like, you don't have to pay them for this. They're actually paying you. Now, it's not much, but they're paying you to learn this skill. Why don't you just do it for another 6 months? Learn as much as you can. Don't worry about making money. We'll be fine. Learn as much as you can. Try to have fun. And then we'll get a real sales job after that. Man, Steve, I can't tell you how great that was to hear that. It just took the burden of...
Wall.
Yeah, it took the burden off of providing and put the onus more on just learning. Like, hey, just let me learn as much as I can. I started meeting with the top reps in the office, trying to find out what they were doing. I read every book that they put in front of me, tried to dig for knowledge out of that. And I started implementing a lot of the strategies that they were teaching me that I was maybe too stubborn to do at first. I didn't try to make money. I tried to make people happy. And this was really interesting. One thing I learned in door-to-door sales is, if you don't make somebody smile or laugh, you really don't have a chance. It doesn't guarantee a sale to make somebody smile or laugh, but if you can make them laugh or make them smile a little bit, you got a chance. And so I started just trying to come up with creative, silly, goofy ways to get people to laugh during the day. And then I found that I got more opportunities in doing that. And then when I really tried to help people and to help them save money on their supplies, help them save time on going to the store and ordering online and the convenience of it all. When I really tried to help people, I was able to sell a lot more and I got a lot better at it. And I ended up making it for the year. In fact, I made it 15 months in total before I started looking for my new job. And at that time, I went to a recruiter in Portland, Oregon, where we lived. And I said, "Hey, I'd really like a real sales job now, something with benefits and a base salary maybe, because door to door was 100% commission. You only ate what you killed."
Yeah.
And so she happened to have a relationship with the inside sales manager at DAT, Freight and Analytics out in Portland, Oregon. And that's where I got my start after a year of door-to-door sales. It looks pretty good on a resume. And so even though I was pretty unconventional in my resume in terms of teaching and youth ministry, that 15 months of door-to-door really helped me out. And I got an opportunity at DAT, made the most of it, did pretty well, got promoted about 18 months in. And it really started my career in the industry and just getting to know people and meeting people. And from that point on, it's hard to get out, right? I mean, I think all of us feel that way. Once you're in this industry, it's a great industry with good people. It's a very interesting industry. It's fast moving. It's ever changing, yet staying the same quite a bit. And I enjoyed it. And so I got into that. And that's where I've been for the last 13 years now.
That's a great story. I love it. And look at that. We're on LinkedIn. We can connect from afar. You're in St. Louis. I'm in Winnipeg, Canada, and we're doing a podcast and we're recording right now. That's a great story, Trey. I learned things that I did not know about you from you telling me what you went through, even from when we've talked a few times in the past. I wrote a couple things down because this is what I do. Used car salesman, absolutely. That's the way that I felt. Greasy. Why am I doing this? This is disgusting. I thought, with my employee mind at the time, I was supposed to go to work, show up, get a paycheck, go home, come back the next day. That got turned on its head very quickly, doing what I do as well too.
Yeah.
Being rejected as well, Trey, chews away at your ego. I understand ego is the enemy. Ryan Holiday says it best, but we all have one for sure. And it eats away at you. And it ate away at me for a long period of time. I was doing the same thing. I made no money. I mean, it took us 3 or 4 years in order to break even, let alone hit the green in order to make any money. In our business, doing freight brokerage, same type of thing. You also said that your wife was very impactful in the relationship that you had and the belief that you had in yourself, and you could run through a brick wall. I had the same. I think there's one thing on the earth and the world that you need to get right, and that's marrying the right woman. Would you agree?
I think it has the most impact on what your life will look like, whether it be business or relationships or whatever
Absolutely.
it is. That's the most important decision that you make on this earth
It has to be.
outside of following Jesus is who the heck do you marry?
That's right. That's right. And that's they talk about the difference between eternal life and worldly life for sure. So serve God, marry the right woman for sure. I say that on the heels of my 1 year and wedding anniversary, which is coming up on September 21st. Fortunately, as well, too, my wife,
Congratulations.
thank you very much. My wife's birthday is on the 19th, which is great. Shout out to Casey Setka. She hasn't been on the show yet, but she will be. So that's very important. And a couple more things just about sales that I loved what you said. I did the same thing. If you haven't been told to F off from somebody's office before, I don't think you've done it right. And I have a great story about that I'll share on the podcast at another time. And then you said, hey, I had to pay my dues. So I went in and I did some crazy stuff to make people laugh and smile and just be a human. I have a quick story I want to tell you. Halloween, I dressed up and I went out door knocking all day with the Halloween costume. That was a memory that I will never forget when it comes to 5, 6, 7 years ago from 7 a.m. until probably 5 p.m. in a freaking Halloween costume. It was fantastic. That was a great conversation, Trey. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. I want to give you some opportunity to say some final words and also mix in where everyone can find you and what sort of shameless plug you can put into this podcast.
Sure. Well,
Big plugs.
yeah, no, absolutely. They can find me on LinkedIn if they're business oriented, but I'm also at other platforms as well. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. My handle's Trey Griggs 24 because that's my college number. It was 24 in basketball.
Kobe Bryant.
Kobe Bryant, I didn't do it on purpose. In fact, he was 8 at that time, so it wasn't on purpose at all. He
There you
became
go.
24 later. But yeah, so Trey Griggs 24 is where they can find me on social media, or they can go to my website, which is really easy to remember. It's treygriggs.com. super simple to find me there. The three things that I focus on are consulting. I put on some golf tournaments called the Post and Pray Classic, and I'm a writer and a speaker. And I'm about to launch my first book and start my second book and to do corporate speaking engagements as a result of that. So those are the things I enjoy doing. If any of those things would provide value to you and you want to talk more about it, definitely reach out to me. But either way, love just to connect with people. I am an extrovert of extroverts. So I want to talk to as many people as possible and be connected, and would love just to help any way I can. If I can pray for you in some way, I'm happy to do that. If you have questions about following Jesus and what that looks like, I'd love to talk to you about that. I went through a long journey when I was 24, 25, 26 years old to learn as much as I can, not only about Christianity, but other world religions, and just evaluate it all and try to figure out what's true and what's not. And happy to help anybody who's exploring that or have questions or just needing a little help in that area. But that's how you connect.
Well, thank you very much. That's awesome. And thanks for joining us. I just want to acknowledge you with your courage and your faith and your spirit and your energy and your gray beard and everything that you do in order to be a good man, a good father, a good servant of the Lord, and a wonderful person. So that's it for today. Trey's got a great newsletter for those who are interested in that. Jump onto his website. You can find him there. He loves to have conversations. You fill up his inbox. He'll respond to absolutely everyone. And have a good day, everybody. Be able to defend your position specifically. Why you follow God and Jesus Christ, and go out and kill it in your life. Thanks, Trey.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you found value in what we shared and that you'll take it with you to positively impact the world around you. If so, we'd love for you to take a moment to rate, review, and share the show, because we're on a mission to grow and reach more hearts. Prayers, gratitude, and love. Until next time.